At this point, I'm going to give just a short presentation on how I would attack a cite check from a paralegal perspective if I were given a brief by an attorney today. And hopefully you can take some of these steps with you and incorporate them into how you may or how you will begin to do your cite checking, and hopefully you'll be a superstar as well. So here I've got a blank brief. This is just a mock brief that went to the Supreme Court, and if I just flip through a couple of pages, you'll see it's completely blank. I haven't highlighted any citations in here. The first thing I do when I get a brief from an attorney is I print it and I highlight every single citation in here. So when I say citation, I'm talking about every single footnote, every single quote that's highlighted, or any single quote that's pulled from another source. I highlight everything so that I know once I've pulled all my sources together, I know exactly what I'm looking at when I'm doing my cite check. So that is my first step. I print it out and I highlight every single case, every single rule, anything that's citing to an authority, I'm highlighting it so that I know that's what I need to check. The second step that you will do is to review the local rules of the particular court in which you are filing this brief. So if I'm filing in the District of Columbia, I'm going to review the local rules of the District of Columbia to make sure that they don't have any rules that would supersede what's in the Blue Book. Anytime a state has rules that are specific to cite checking and the format of the citations, those rules trump what's in the Blue Book. In other words, you go with what the state rules want, and the Blue Book comes secondary. So if it's not addressed in the state rules, you'll be able to find a relevant example in the Blue Book and utilize that as your model for forming a citation for whatever source that you need to. The third thing I would do is ask my attorneys, hey, have you guys pulled these cases already? Do you have a collection of all the materials that are cited in here already to save me some time from having to go onto Westlaw or Lexis and pull those cases, the details of which we can get into that later. But if they don't have that material available, it's going to be up to you to pull that material. So as long as you've got a Westlaw and or Lexis password, very easy to get on there, pull the cases that you need, the statutes, the rules that you need, and then be able to continue with your cite check. So gathering all the materials that you need in one place so that you can work efficiently and effectively on performing the cite check would be the third step. Rule number 4. I like to highlight in all one color, but when I first started, I used to use two colors. One for any citations to any legal documents, and a second color for any citations to any documents that are on the record. So that way, I know that typically I like to cite check everything that's a legal citation first, and then I'll come back to anything that's cited that's on the record, for example, and I will do those second. You can come up with your own preferences. That's just something that I do. It's helped me out visually so that I know when I go through a brief, I can know that I've addressed everything that's in yellow, all the legal cites, and I know I can address everything in orange, for example, all the other record cites. Next, as you begin to just kind of dig into your cite check, should you come across any errors, you certainly want to make those corrections accordingly. And it's also handy to have, if you have one, if there isn't one provided at your firm, just a one-pager of just your standard proofreading correction marks, so that when you're making corrections in the brief that you may provide to the attorney, you're not providing some type of weird symbols that aren't recognized. So you want to use commonly utilized symbols when it comes to proofreading and cite checking. So if you're inserting some language or removing some language, you're striking that material appropriately or adding your caret, to insert that material appropriately. But if you come across any discrepancies or things that you would change, I think it's also important to note the page and or the rule from the Blue Book from which you are going to then go to the attorney and say, hey, I think you got this wrong, and you can turn to X page in the Blue Book and here's why I'm suggesting that you change it this way. So that's something that I like to do as well as I'm working through my cite check. And another piece of the cite check that I like to do that's kind of along those same lines is if I have an edit that I think is going to be a global edit that needs to be made throughout the document, before I just go and institute those changes myself, I'm going to flag that with the attorney, because if it's going to cause a lot of things to get moved around, or for just going to be, a lot of changes, I want to make sure that is approved before I just go ahead and institute those changes when they may get rejected at the end of the day. And then lastly, I would like to check the ids and any supras and infras that are in the brief. And that's typically the last thing that I do. Because as things get changed and you make edits and the attorneys accept edits and reject others, you want to make sure that those internal references, id meaning a reference to a previous citation that does not include a string of other citations. So if you use, or the attorney uses an id reference, an id citation, you have to be sure that the preceding citation only contains one source to which that id should then be relating. If that previous citation contains more than one source, he or she is wrong for using that id cite, and you need to identify which source specifically is being cited to and adjust that citation accordingly.